Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here.
And I'm Chad Oban. We're back for another live recording of Plain Talk on Wednesday, April 23rd at Peacock Alley in beautiful downtown Bismarck.
We'll be interviewing special guests, reacting to the latest headlines, and answering questions from the audience.
Admission is free, so plan to arrive early, grab a great spot. We'll kick things off around 5:30.
That's Wednesday, April 23rd at Peacock Alley in Bismarck, starting at 5:30 p.m.
We'll see you there.
The work done by the thousands of North Dakota oil and natural gas workers is working to improve energy independence and national security. Working to make America more competitive around the world. And working to provide a better today and tomorrow for everyone in North Dakota and across our country. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas works for our future. North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, advancing the possibilities.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, and we're down to the nitty-gritty of the legislative session, and that means the appropriations committees are super busy. And we have, in a moment, we're going to be talking to a guest from the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Kyle Davison. He's a Republican from District 41. But before that, I actually have a guest host today. Chad's on vacation again. No, he's not. He's not actually on vacation. I just say that all the time. But our guest co-host is Katie Winbauer, who's an attorney. She works as a lobbyist. She's a columnist. Katie, welcome. And thanks for coming on and coming on this crazy little show that we do.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. And our guest, like I said, Senator Kyle Davison, in before appropriations. And Senator, I wanted, all the work that appropriations is doing. One that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention is sort of the debate over the state hospital in Jamestown. Now, this is a constitutionally mandated institution. It's in our state constitution, and everybody knows about the state hospital in Jamestown, but it is an important cog in our state's mental health. It's an important cog in the criminal justice system. I had a series of stories late last year and earlier this year about, judges, for instance, being frustrated and even to the point where they're dismissing criminal charges because they couldn't find bed space or, basically the capacity to get criminal defendants who were before them in to even get rehabilitated to the point where they were fit to be adjudicated, whether they're guilty or innocent in the proceedings against them. So I guess my first question to you is, where are we at on the state hospital? Because there's a push to build a new one. You guys have a big appropriation in front of you about that. Where are we at?
Thanks for having me. I apologize. I'm losing my voice a little bit this time of session. A lot of conversations going on a regular basis. I just walked out of appropriations and we were talking about the state hospital. So it will come out in the OMB budget. It'll come out at about $285,000. My guess is that we will probably be around $285 million. My guess is we'll probably be around $300 million. So there is a lot of debate, and and I think you have to look at it as a whole. We have to have somebody. We have to have some place. The discussion is really about investing in community services and those step down services, and how do we help people closer to their communities, and what is the level and focus of the state hospital, and then what is the appropriate type of facility, and I guess from a facility standpoint, I think we've had pretty good agreement around the need for the facility. La Hague currently doesn't have it. As we move forward, there's asbestos in there. I agree the building, the argument is the building is only 50 years old. But in 2017, they put out a bid to fix a few things in there. We got asbestos issues. We got other kinds of issues with that building. And it was $15 to $20 million just to do 4 items. So I think there's consensus around the need for the building in itself. Okay. But I think the bigger conversation then gets to be how big, is it 125 beds? Is it 141? Is it 161? And I think we've landed at about 140 beds, currently for $300 million. And then the discussion revolves around the focus. And I think that's a whole nother topic, how big you build it in relationship to what is the focus and the target, that you're in trying to create that system. And so I think with that, it's where are you going to put somebody that's been committed because of insanity that, I'll just say killed their grandmother or something, and they have to be there 20 years. You're not going to put them in Sanford Hospital, or you're not going to, you have to have a place for those people that are long-term. We have some challenges from a geriatric side, on the back side, the back door, getting people out that have felonies that really need to be in a nursing home, but there isn't enough capacity within the nursing homes. We have three nursing homes that take people with criminal record. They are full. So there are a lot of discussions in regards to, trying to create a system. But I think the building of the state hospital is an important part of this legislative session, and I do support it.
Senator Davison, if I can just jump in, I think one of Senator Mathern's points was community-based, building more community-based infrastructure, and maybe waiting until the next session to address the state hospital. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have to keep in mind we've invested about $150 million in community services just over the last couple bienniums. And on the budget that we passed out in the human service budget, we've committed to the community certified community healthcare behavioral health clinics, and that came in 2014. The federal government set up. I don't have the name of the act, but they created an act to create these clinics and help fund these clinics, but you have to have certain parameters in order to be 24/7 and the ability to meet everybody's needs that have needs. So we are adding roughly 100 employees and four of those clinics across the state. So we have made that community investment, and I think that's the right thing to do, and we will continue to it. That's in the current budget that passed the House and the Senate, and is going to conference committee. So we are making that investment parallel to the state hospital.
Is there? I mean, one thing. Are we restrained by our state constitution mandating an institution in Jamestown? And we're making the investment. The Constitution's not changing anytime soon. But sometimes it feels like this might hamstring us a little bit, because having the state hospital right there in Jamestown is great. But if you live up where I'm at in Ward County, and we have, for instance, criminal defendants who need to go to the state hospital, we got to transport them. Most of the state has to transport to Jamestown. Would it be more flexible if we didn't have that mandate and we could really just focus on delivering these services community-based across the state?
So that's a good question. And I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question, but I'll say yes. But because when you do a little research and you sit through as many meetings as I do, you understand that states are closing some of their state-run psychiatric hospitals. But those are larger states, that had 6, 8, 10 of them, Texas, Pennsylvania. And you start to, when Senator Mathern talks about, well, this is kind of old medicine, what we're doing, and people are closing these psychiatric clinics, or psychiatric hospitals run by the state, that's fair, but they're reducing them down. In North Dakota, we only have one. And usually you use a number between 100,000 and, between 75 and 100,000, you need one hospital. So if you listen to consultants, they always round numbers. But just like when we get federal grants, we're a minimally funded state on many of the federal grants. Well, we have to have one state hospital, and our Constitution says Jamestown, so it does it does hinder us. Nobody's ever brought a bill forward to try to take that out of there. So the answer to your question, I guess, is yes, it does hinder us a little bit. And that's why we use the behavioral health clinics as our next stepping stone in order to, create more fidelity in our system for dealing with people that have behavioral health, mental health issues.
How many behavioral health clinics are there in North Dakota?
Well, the first 4 are going to be in Bismarck, Minot, Grand Forks, and Fargo, and they're working through that process. Right, there's a process of hiring people, building it up, and then allowing it to be allowing to have matching federal dollars for the work that we're doing. Right, so a lot of the people that are in these behavioral health clinics will be able to bill their services through Medicaid. Right, so that helps the state fund those positions. The more positions that, and there's a diminishing returns, but the more positions that you fund and that are billable for treating people that are on Medicaid or qualify for Medicaid, that revenue is important, and those systems are important to put together along with the federal dollars to sustain them long term. So those are the first 4 is the answer to your question.
I guess the other component about that is hiring. It's one thing to say we're going to build these facilities. It's another thing to find the personnel with the education and the skills to staff them. Is there anything we all know about North Dakota's challenges when it comes to having basically no available workforce. So, it's one thing to make the funds available to build the facilities. Has the legislature thought about tackling the challenges of hiring for them?
Yeah. So we've started hiring them, right? We gave them money to start hiring. And so keep in mind, the one in Fargo, the behavioral health clinic in Fargo, we have a building that we own in Fargo, right? So, these were the human service centers, and we're transitioning them into the behavioral health clinic. So we have facilities and we have some people already working in them, but they have had good luck in hiring. I don't know if it's kind of it's not as bad as it has been. You're always going to have a hard time getting those higher level psychiatry doctors to the state hospital or something. Those are always going to be challenging positions. But we, from what I understand from Pam Sagnes, who runs behavioral health at the State Human Services, that we've seen more applications and we've seen more interest. So that's positive. But yes, we're always going to have the challenge of workforce, and that was the fear, to be honest with you, about building the state hospital too large. Is how you going to staff it? You have the Ann Carlson School there, you have the Jamestown Hospital there, and so that certainly is a consideration about the size of the hospital you're going to build for the state hospital.
I want to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking a little bit about the Office of Management and budget, and and we just had a state Supreme Court case where they came in and said, lawmakers, you can't be using this as a Christmas tree anymore. Our state constitution has a single subject rule, so all the legislation in a bill has to be related to the same subject, and you can't just be inserting stuff willy-nilly. I'm looking at an amendment that was brought to the Office of Management and Budget to create a life education committee. Looks like it was brought by Senator Terry Wanzik. Creates $1 million for a life education committee, and the bulk of that money would, I guess, essentially go to some third-party contractor that would promote alternatives to abortion. Setting aside the question of how we all might feel about the issue of abortion specifically, this seems like a direct violation of what the state Supreme Court told the legislature not to do anymore. How is a life education committee related to the Office of Management and Budget?
So first of all, let me back up just a second.
Sure.
I'll get to your question for sure. I can see this is my 6th session, and there is no question in my mind that we as a legislature are paying attention to that decision made by the Supreme Court in regards to the OMB budget. we were just down hearing it. I had to jump out really quick before we passed the final bill on that issue, and on another issue on an amendment we defeated. The question came up: how is it germane? And so that's a fair question, Rob. And what I will tell you in regards to the life education piece of it, that funding in that committee will be set up by OMB and ran through OMB and procured through OMB. But we are sensitive to that, and we are having conversations about it in all things that we do on all bills. So that's a fair question.
What
I
about,
think Rob, I think if you look at that bill, you'll notice that there isn't a lot of things on there. I mean, if we just looked at it,
yeah, I mean, I've noticed definitely a shift. I just thought this was curious, and I thought,
well, it is. It can be argued. I mean, it's a fair argument, right? We debated it in downstairs.
Yeah, I was wondering too, like it coming in at this point in the session. I mean, this is we're creating a new committee, commission, whatever we want to call it. We have all sorts of boards and commissions. In fact, one of the initiatives Governor Armstrong talked about at the beginning of the session was going through some of these boards and commissions and determining like what are you doing? Like, or is it still worth having them? Are they still meeting regularly? Are they still serving a public need, and maybe getting rid of some of the ones that aren't? And so, it seems like, shouldn't this be a standalone bill? I feel like there's been no committee hearings or anything on this specific proposal. I guess you guys are discussing it now, but it hasn't gone through the process like another full-on bill would.
Right. And I agree with you. I'm one of the appropriators that get frustrated by that. And so when people ask me to put things in, into I serve on the Human Service Subcommittee, right? And I've always pushed back on bills that get added in the last minute. Do they happen, and do I vote for some? I do, but that doesn't mean, and this is a good example. Chairman Beckedahl of Appropriations said the same thing this morning. A bit of frustration in regards to it not being a standalone bill. And you just have so much, I don't want to, in general, those standalone bills that make it all the way through have had a minimum of 4 hearings, 2 of them in appropriations, and they're better pieces of legislation because of it when they pass through like that. And especially when you're setting something up new and it's a new appropriation. So you're talking to somebody that agrees with you on that. And this would be an example of something that bothers me. But again, it'll go to conference committee. It wasn't in the House. And so there'll be further discussion.
So when this happens, Senator, because this is really a policy amendment, right? It's not so much. Yeah. And
Yes.
so when this happens, how does the Appropriations Committee look to get kind of that public comment and the input that a normal policy bill would get from a regular committee?
Well, people are just, you know as well as I do that there is no way to get public comment when there's 10 days left in the session, right? The reality is that some things are going to come up that we weren't aware of, that are a need more than a want. I would say that this is more of a want than a need. And again, if it has the votes going through, it's going to be in there. If it doesn't, it won't be in there. And it's just how you make sausage. And sometimes they put flavors in there you don't like. And so it's fair enough to pinpoint this one and kind of pick at it a little bit, but it isn't the only one that will be in there at the end. It's just a little more controversial.
Well, it's yeah, and listen, I'm not against. Sometimes we have to bring in bills late because something happens, and now there's an unforeseen need. I think some of what's happening with we just saw the legislature have to act to replace some federal funding for, among other things, a lagoon in Pheasant, North Dakota. That's pretty important infrastructure. Yep. The federal funding has now evaporated, and the state had to step up and make a decision, and that was appropriate.
And Lincoln is ready to go.
Right, exactly. And the Pheasant one just stuck in my mind. Pheasant's near me.
Yeah,
I like Pheasant. Pheasant's a nice town. Anyway, I don't know why I'm suddenly a member of the Pheasant Tourism Board. Well, last question about, I wanted to talk a little bit about property taxes. We're having a little bit of a Donnybrook between the Senate and the House over property taxes, and now it seems like we have two mostly duplicate bills. One is gone to conference committee, one is still in the Senate, 1176 and 1168. Where are you at on that debate? Because it seems to me that we come down to two bones of contention. One is, how much is the primary residence credit going to be? And in the one bill, I saw the Senate Finance and Tax Committee moved it back up to $16.50. I think in 1176, it's at $12.50. And then the other thing is, are we going to cap the amount of that credit that primary residence homeowners can be? So where are you at on that debate?
So again, I'll tell you where I'm at, but you have to keep in mind, I'm down in the dungeon working on the human service bill from 8:00 in the morning till 5:30 at night for the last 3 weeks. So I do pay attention to it, right? Though, because it's an important bill to my constituents and all constituents. But I think Senator Hoag's been taking a little too much heat for his position and establishing what is the Senate stance on property taxes. And fair enough to say that there's some disagreement amongst our caucus here and working through that process. But I think what gets lost in the discussion is we're trying to get accurate numbers. I mean, we don't want to put something in there that we cannot sustain long term. And that's what we're trying to do. And we have some really good people in our committee and Senator Hoag's leadership on the issue and very open discussions in our caucus about the bill. So I would hope now that we understand the tax commissioner is, he's trying to protect himself from not having enough money to send out. He can always come and get a deficiency payment, but nobody likes to do that, right? They feel like they didn't do their job right. But really trying to narrow down is how much money are we at, getting that number closer. And we try to do that on a lot of things. Instead of just picking some high number like they do when they budget, we try to, what are you going to actually spend in a 2-year period? So I support the skin in the game. I support the 25% skin in the game. I support the cap at 3%. I support at least $12.50, and I'm hopeful now from our last discussion from the committee and in our caucus that it could be closer to $1,500. I don't want to get people excited about that because we've got some accurate numbers and we've got the data now to make decisions and the Senate to put a stamp on that.
Pertaining to the skin in the game specifically, I mean, that's something, I like the idea that we're moving the cap back up. The skin in the game thing, I have not been such a fan of. And part of it is the way we're doing it, where if we cap, so the way it works, the way that the Senate's position, well, I guess as expressed by Senator Hoag, I know not everybody in the Senate agrees with this, but the position.
No, that's true. Not everybody's agreeing with everything.
And not everybody in the House agrees with it either. So, I mean, but the debate is, it would cap so that the credit maxes out at $16.50 and whatever the credit is, it maxes out at that. I think there's a $500 floor as well, so you're going to get at least $500. Yeah. But then the question is, if you're in between those two, it can't be more. It can't replace more than 75% of your property tax bill.
That's correct.
What worries me about that is if you're Doug Burgum, you're going to get the full credit because your property is, very valuable, and your property taxes are commensurate with that, and so you're going to get the full credit. But if I own a $50,000 home in Carpio, North Dakota, I'm probably not going to see the full credit. And I'm just wondering if that's the right message to send to voters, where people who have big property tax bills are going to see the full credit, but if you're maybe on the lower end of the income scale and your home reflects that, you're not going to see the full credit. That just seems like a bad way to do it to me.
Yeah. So first of all, you're right. It's about, to get the full credit, roughly, depending on what number you're using, you're going to have about $2,200 in property taxes, $2,200 in property taxes to max out, right? Anything above that, you'll get the full credit. But, when you dig into it a little bit, you talk about the debate about it a little bit, and you get into some of the more rural communities and those legislators tend to have a little more problem with it because the property value isn't as high. then from a voting standpoint and to be able to raise their property taxes, if there is no skin in the game, it's a lot easier to just appraise their houses higher and to pass a bond issue or to pass a vote, because they'll just keep getting that credit. They'll just get it. And there's no there 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 isn't a good balance there to debate the issue, because it's really not going to cost them any money, because the state will just pick that up. I don't know if I made that very clear or not, but that's one of the arguments, a little bit that sway me with the 25%. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not the best guru. I do follow it, and I do take time to understand it, but that's one of the things that sways me.
What about the cap on the, because obviously a big part of anybody's property tax bill is going to be the local school district. In 1176, which is Representative Nathy's bill, it represents the Armstrong plan. That's the one the governor's backing. That does cap the 3% cap applies to school districts, but 1168 that the Senate Finance and Tax Committee just kicked out does not. Do you think school districts should be included in the cap?
So to be honest with you, I haven't seen 1168 yet. I know some of the I did see they kicked it out. I did not look at it. My understanding is there are some things that we need to do in regards to school districts to make sure that there's some balance there, and that would be more that I would be just guessing if I tried to proceed very much farther than that. But I have not heard the debate on the technical corrections yet, and nor have I looked at that bill because they just kicked it out.
Sure.
Sorry about that. I wish I knew more about that. I do know from, obviously we talk and there's a lot of conversations going on every 10 minutes, right? Now that we have more time and that we kick things out, but I do know that there's a lot of conversations around the school district piece to make sure that we have that correct in the final bill.
Last question. Any predictions on when your guys are going to go sine die? Finish this thing up?
Well, this is a fun time, but, I don't think, and I'm not looking for a pat on the back, right? But I don't think people realize what a challenge this is, and it wears on you. The longer you're in it, the more responsibility that you feel like you have to try to get things right. And my wife always asks how the day's going, and I always say, well, I won more than I lost today, or I lost more than I won, because nobody comes out of here pitching a perfect record. It's challenging. But it gets in your blood, and I'm going to say April 30th or May 1st. Depends if they keep us here the next weekend. So
yeah,
if they keep us over the weekend, we might be able to hit April 30th, but we got to settle the property tax. We got to settle the school choice bill. And then there's always a clunker in the human services bill at the end. That's something.
Where are you at on the school choice thing, by the way, too? I just wrote about that this morning. I thought we got two competing bills. We have a House bill, and I'm forgetting the number now. That was just amended in the
2400.
Senate.
Yeah,
2400 is the Senate bill. The House bill was just before the Senate, though, and that just got amended yesterday. Which approach do you prefer?
Well, I did vote for 2400 as it left the Senate, but I voted no yesterday on 1540. That's a voucher bill, right? And I don't think that helps all kids.
I agree.
I would rather see 2400 that helps all kids. I wouldn't mind spending a little bit more money for that. But I'm a no on 1540. I live in District 41 in Fargo. That's right in the middle of Fargo Oak Grove and Fargo Shanley parents, right? So I get a lot of emails, let's put it that way. But that'll keep us here. I'm hoping they can do. You probably are following closer than I am right now on the House side, but I hope that 2400 comes around and we put something together that looks more like 2400 that left the Senate. I'm okay with a bill around $50-60 million. I say, don't worry about the money, do it right so that we're actually improving education.
Well, I mean, I think the thing I'm most excited, I don't want a voucher bill, and that's what the House bill that got amended yesterday. It was only for private school, public school kids. I really like the idea of an education savings account so that North Dakota students, whether they're getting educated in a private school, a public school, or they're being homeschooled, will have some funds available that you can use. I know Chad hates this part when he's on. He doesn't want
He
any of it.
does.
He doesn't want any of it used for. Doesn't want any of it used for private school tuition. I'm fine with that, but just make the same dollar amount available for everybody. And say if you want to use it for tuition, great. If you want to use it to get your kids some tutoring, or they have dyslexia or something, great. You want to use it to send them to computer camp, great. All
You
those,
want to use it for lunch? For
Yeah.
lunches too.
yeah,
Right?
great. I think
That-
all of that would be wonderful. That's the
Yeah.
approach that I want. It sounds like that's what you want as well.
We're on the same page for sure on that one.
I think a lot of people would agree on that too, right? I think that is just kind of a generally agreed upon idea. So I hope to see that one succeed too.
Yeah. Chad just doesn't like the tuition part.
No,
Which I
no,
understand.
yeah, and there's 26 solid votes for a voucher bill on the Senate side, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at the vote yesterday, and I tried to pick some that might. I wasn't able to see anybody that's going to waffle on the 1540.
I had a conspiracy theory about what they did to that House bill. I thought that they turned that into everything that the school choice people, the anti-school choice people hate, to make 2400 look more appealing by comparison. That was my conspiracy theory. I don't know if that was actually the tactic, but I was like, ooh, boy, and I don't even like that bill.
I don't think Senator Axman gets enough credit for all the work that she's done on. There's a lot of people that follow her when she's putting amendments out. I mean, they trust the work that not that they don't trust what others have done, but she's been very articulate, very consistent, very understanding of the issues, both nationally and locally. So
I agree with her or disagree with her. I think she's done an excellent job of shepherding this debate.
Yes.
The legislature. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, we got to go. Senator Davison, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the day.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You'd expect to see the North Dakota oil and natural gas industry working at wells and processing facilities. What you might not know is our oil and gas industry also works to build roads, provide school funding, and even protect us from flooding by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, our great outdoors, and our schools. North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, advancing the possibilities.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Senator Kyle Davison talking about all the fun things that are happening in appropriations, the state hospital. This is a crazy time at the end of the legislative session because all sorts of things are happening. Bills are getting amended willy-nilly left and right. They're even getting hot. And by the way, Jen and I were talking about trying to figure out where the term hog house came from. You know, you hear lawmakers talk about it all the time. It's like, why hog house? Where did that come from? I actually have an answer for that. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show. We had a couple of listeners that came up and they know the history for it. And it's colorful history, as you might imagine, a term like hog house. It's a lot of fun. You know, my other thing is they love euphemisms in the legislature. The other thing, and I don't hear it as much, but you used to hear it all the time where they talk about belt and suspenders. I used to love that, where they're like a belt and suspenders bill. And it's intended to be like a redundancy. Like you either need a belt or you need suspenders. You don't necessarily need both. So they'd be like, well, this is redundant. This is like wearing a belt and suspenders. I always loved that. I thought that was so cool. I like that.
And they have so many catchphrases that if you are really involved or you follow the legislature, you pick up on.
Yeah.
I think one I've noticed for years now is the phrase heartburn. Like, well, this bill doesn't give me heartburn, or this bill gives a lot of people heartburn. They love to say that too. Yeah,
they love the cliches. All right, we're gonna move on and stop teasing the legislature, and we're gonna talk with Dane DeKrey. He is a criminal defense attorney. He's a managing partner at Ringstrom Dekrey. I'm assuming because his name's in the firm title, he probably helped found that firm too. The reason why we're having Dane on is he recently made headlines. They are a Moorhead-based law firm, and although they operate in North Dakota as well, but they signed on to what's called an amicus brief. And this is essentially where people who aren't, and I'm about to explain what an amicus brief is to a couple of lawyers who are on this show. So let the high school dropout tell you or not high school, college dropout. Geez, boy, I downgraded myself. An amicus brief is essentially, one of these attorneys can correct me, somebody who's not a party to the case. It's like a friend of the court, where they come in and they say, hey, judge, you should hear our point of view on this and consider it. And what the amicus brief is on is the Trump administration essentially executing through executive orders and other maneuvers, executing retribution on law firms he considers to be his political enemies. In this instance, it's a law firm that Robert Mueller worked for. We all remember Mueller, Mr. Mueller, and his report investigating President Trump's actions during his first term in office. So essentially what he's doing is he's saying that this, it's called the WilmerHale law firm. And what his order says is essentially they're not allowed to have security clearance to work for the government. They're not allowed to enter government buildings, if you can imagine that. And by targeting them, it also hurts them because, clients who might need their attorneys to be able to go into government buildings, or might need their attorneys to have a security clearance, or might not just want to risk the ire of the president of the United States, might decide I can't be a client of this law firm. So, Dane, you and your firm got involved in this. Tell us first of all, did I explain all that right? Second of all, why did you get involved in this?
Yeah, for a high school or a college dropout, you did
college dropout.
Okay,
I messed up. All right, I finished high school.
No, you did a very good job explaining it.
Thank you.
So we got involved with this lawsuit for two reasons. The first is personal. I went to law school with a very good friend who works at WilmerHale. And so their law firm, I think, had an idea that eventually they would be subject to one of these orders, given the makeup of their firm and specifically Robert Mueller. And so I had talked to him early on if they were going to be fighting or not. And when he said they'd be fighting, I felt like, okay, our law firm in whatever way possible should also be part of that fight. And so that was the personal aspect. But the other way is the easier aspect, which is standing up for the idea that law firms should be able to represent whoever they want to represent without fear of government retribution. And that sounds like it should be an easy, simple proposition, but it has been interesting to see how much support that our firm and myself have gotten personally, but not so much publicly. And so I do think that there still is a chill that is out there by this administration. And I think law firms are deciding very quickly what side of the line they want to be on.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because I think law firms, we have clients of all kinds, of all political persuasions. And so where do you want to draw the line, and how far does this retaliation go? And so what was kind of your mindset in deciding to join on to that, the letter, from that perspective of how will this affect my law firm broadly in Moorhead or Fargo?
Yeah. So obviously in this area of the country, it's pretty conservative. And so we knew going in that this was going to be a difficult decision from a business standpoint. I will say our law firm is a bit positioned better than I think some other firms. We don't really have a general practice. And so we are 90% criminal defense and 10% civil rights. And what that positions us to be able to say is all we do is take on the government. And so for us, it's not that far different to say this is just us staying principled and taking on the government. And so every government that I've been a part of, whether it's the first Obama administration or the first Trump administration or the Biden administration or now the second Trump administration, each and every time I've always been against the government. And so, I do have some understanding for firms that have a more difficult decision because they have a diversified practice. I still do think that we need to meet the moment as lawyers to understand that if it can happen to them, it can happen to us. But it is fair for me to say it's easier for our firm because we are able to stay true to say this isn't that far from what we've been since we've started.
What bothers me, the American tradition of criminal justice guarantees that everybody has a right to legal representation. So I mean, by nature, like for instance, Dane, your practice, by definition, your clients are not very sympathetic. These are people who've been accused of crime, right? Maybe you don't like the way that's characterized, but as a practical political matter, criminal defendants aren't typically very popular people. And yet we afford them a constitutional right. We understand that a law firm has a duty, an obligation to provide a vigorous defense for those people, because it's not just about the guilt or innocence of that particular person. It's also making sure the government follows the rules and don't just run roughshod over people's rights. I want to read something from President Trump's order, his specific order that you, in the matter that you've signed the amicus brief on. The quote says, WilmerHale engages in obvious partisan representations to achieve political ends, supports efforts to discriminate on the basis of race, backs the obstruction of efforts to prevent illegal aliens from committing horrific crimes and trafficking deadly drugs within our borders, and furthers the degradation of the quality of American elections, including by supporting efforts designed to enable non-citizens to vote. Now, I'm looking at all those, and the discrimination on basis of race, that's the DEI stuff where he doesn't like quota hiring. I don't know what WilmerHale's hiring practices are. If they're a private entity, I think their hiring practices could be whatever they want them to be. I don't care that much about that. The rest of this just sounds like this law firm does things that President Trump doesn't like. This obvious partisan representations to achieve political ends, that's democracy, right? Everybody's a partisan for their point of view and their set of values. This idea of obstructing efforts to prevent illegal aliens from committing horrific crimes and trafficking deadly drugs, does that just mean they represent criminal defendants in court who are accused of being in this country illegally or accused of doing crimes? Because I don't have a problem with that. Those people should be defended. They should have a right to legal counsel, even if I don't like them very much. So I'm looking at this and it's so much like there's no evidence here that WilmerHale did something inappropriate or that they did something illegal or that they abused their security clearances or something. It's just the president doesn't like them. Therefore, they can't come in government buildings.
What they did is practice law, and they practice law in a way that the president and this administration doesn't agree with. And my response to that is beat them in a court of law. I say that every time I hear people say to my firm, how can you represent that person, or how can you help get them off, or whatever they say. And I always respond with, there's another side who is actively trying to prevent that. And that is why we do it in the arena of a court of law, and we don't run to the referees and change the rules when we don't like the outcome. And that's what's happening here. I have no problem with another firm trying to beat WilmerHale or my firm each and every time we have a conflict, but that is what the rule of law and due process and our system is founded on, which is to have an adversarial system like this. And when it doesn't go your way, and then if you happen to get into power, to not change the rules of the game. Because what happens when the next administration comes in and they find the other political persuasion wrong, and then a law firm like Jones Day, which is the stereotypical Republican law firm, to WilmerHale's Democratic law firm, will they be subjected to a executive order like this? And if they are, which I've said in every interview, I will sign on to that amicus brief too. And that is what's important for people to understand. I couldn't care less that this comes from Donald Trump. I care that the rule of law is being questioned. And as lawyers and as my law firm, especially because of what you said, Rob, we defend people who are not sympathetic the vast majority of the time. And if a person who is not sympathetic cannot call out for a lawyer and have someone answer, we are in a dangerous territory, and I don't want to be there.
Yeah, I mean, that's what scares me, right? Is I do criminal defense work too, and it is very scary to think if this goes away, our system crumbles. And what happens? I mean, we're unraveling just years of protections and the way the judicial system operates. But another thing I'm thinking about is just, since when have there been all these attacks on the judicial system? I've only been a lawyer for a few years, and so my experience is limited, but it seems like recently it's very scary that there's so much question called into the judiciary when this is a separate branch. The president should not be controlling things like this, should not be issuing executive orders on how law firms or lawyers operate. And so, Dane, with your experience too, what do you think about that?
One of the biggest things that I've been afraid of, and it's been more recent than when I first began as a lawyer, is the idea that the process is political and that every decision can be understood as that's a Democratic judge, that's a Republican judge, and we don't take into consideration that really 90 to 95% of the things that most judges do are very apolitical, and they're using long time case law, and it's very normal, and it has nothing to do with politics. And so I worry about that because that really strikes at the heart of what our justice system is supposed to be. And I think it really cheapens what our work is. And it's easy. I mean, we don't have very many democratically appointed federal judges in North Dakota. And so as a criminal defense lawyer, it's very easy when your clients complain about that or people say, oh, well, that's just because they were appointed by President Trump. And I really recoil at that because the vast majority of judges, and I think we're seeing that in these decisions, the Maryland judge, Judge Boasberg, these are, Republican appointees, Democratic appointees. They are trying to do the right thing, and there will be differences in how you interpret the law. But I worry as much as you about how it cheapens our work when we just try to politicize everything.
I'm thinking of the Supreme Court election they just had in Wisconsin that became I mean, you don't normally see a judicial election make national headlines unless there's like some horrendous scandal. But you have Elon Musk writing checks to voters down there, and he lost, and I'm glad he lost. But I think everybody kind of lost in that election because it became explicitly partisan. It was explicitly partisan. And, we have judicial elections here in North Dakota too. Most of the time, nobody pays attention to them, which is a whole other thing we could talk about, but they're not typically partisan, which I think is a good thing. And I'm very worried about that. And I'm worried because both sides have done it. I think back to the some of these Supreme Court, confirmation processes, the one against Brett Kavanaugh jumps to mind. I think a lot of the tactics that Democrats deployed against Brett Kavanaugh were wildly unfair. I think you could probably say the same, although it wasn't nearly so muted, but you could probably say the same thing of, some of the hearing for instance, Justice Sotomayor. The Kavanaugh one jumped out to me in particular, but I think we've kind of done this to ourselves where we have treated these confirmation hearings. I mean, generally, I'm of the opinion that if somebody's the president of the United States and they nominate somebody to the Supreme Court, barring some evidence of somebody being just wildly not qualified to have the position or having criminal things in their background or something, they ought to confirm them. We elected the president, they ought to confirm, but instead we've turned them into these partisan battles. And now this is what President Trump is trying to do to these law firms has just become the most extreme manifestation where we're treating the court not as a separate independent third branch, but a sort of battleground for proxy wars between the political parties.
Yeah, I think that goes to Katie's point where, this idea of three co-equal branches of government is being tested right now. And I think it's being tested by the executive branch. And, I do think when you begin to politicize the judicial process, that's sort of pushing the snowball off the top of the hill and it rolls down. And by the end, it's more than what you bargained for. And so I do think right now, things like Wisconsin and other, this politicization is us trying or elected officials trying to wrestle away power from the co-equal judicial branch, because it seems like it's the last branch that is fighting back against some of the policies that are trying to be enacted. I don't think the legislative branch is probably meeting the moment right now in this administration. And so
Yeah,
it's always
there's supposed to be a check on executive power as well.
right. And it's always hard to remember who took the first shot in the war or where this began. I take your point
I
on
don't-
yeah,
I don't care who shot. Everybody's hands are dirty
Right.
on this.
right. And now the question is, what do we do? And I have been encouraged by district court judges and circuit court judges across the spectrum in terms of appointees from Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. But I do think that there will continue to be pushes on, the outer limits of what this administration can get away with, chipping away at the norms of the legal process.
Dane, do you think some of this too is a misunderstanding of the legal process? I just think of some things happening locally within North Dakota that have been kind of attacks on the local judiciary. And I think a lot of those pertain to a misunderstanding of kind of the way things operate. And like we talked about case law, going back years, that's not politically motivated. It's based on the law and interpretation of law. And so do you think we've maybe spiraled to this place because a lot of people are misunderstanding how the legal process works and that it's not a partisan process?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of everything. A lot of the law is not super sexy, and it doesn't lead the 6 o'clock news, and the everyday work that we do most of the time goes unnoticed. And then we sort of highlight these either partisan issues or controversial issues, and the tail begins to wag the dog, in my experience. Everyone who is an expert in their own profession, when you watch a legal show, you sort of recoil at some of the things they say. You get that in the news too. I appreciate when people are really trying very hard to get it right and tell the story right, but I do think the simplification of the system allows for better manipulation, and both sides do that. That's not really a partisan. A lot of things aren't partisan in that regard. Everyone does that to their own ends, but I wish that there was a way to have a better understanding of the 90% instead of the 10%.
Yeah, a lot of I think the lens through which the public sees this is through issues like abortion, right? I mean, the abortion rulings captured the public's imagination. They create a lot of hard feelings on both sides for the same-sex marriage rulings. And I think part of it is there is a valid debate about the judicial philosophy around some of those. For instance, even if you like the outcome or don't like the outcome, for instance, I thought Roe v. Wade was badly decided. I think it has contributed to generations of strife in our country that would have been unnecessary if we had instead settled that matter as we are now through a legislative process that yes, is attendant to hard feelings and ugly debates at times, but at least at the end of it has something that is was passed and represents the will of the people to one extent or another. And I realize it's hard to tell people who feel passionately about these things that you have to wait for the political process to play out when it's so much easier to have a judge just impose it through fiat. But I think when the courts have done that, it has created hard feelings. Now, obviously, that's a very right of center conservative interpretation of that, but it's valid. And so I think when we're talking about partisanship or whatever, I think those sorts of debates are valid and are in bounds. The problem is something like this. The reason why this is out of bounds is, and I think we really need to bring this back to President Trump. He's got an enemies list. People are on it because he feels like he's been slighted by them for one reason or another. And he wants to punish them. And it's not really grounded in any ideological or philosophical debate about the role of judiciary and checks and balances. We're having that discussion. President Trump's not thinking that way. And that's probably a mistake that we're making, is reacting to it through that lens.
Yeah, so we're acting reasonably, Rob, is what you're saying?
Right. We're having a reasonable debate about, because I guarantee my view about the proper role of the judiciary is probably divergent from your guys' view of the proper role. And that's fine. That is what it is. That's democracy. What President Trump's doing is something separate from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the reason why we are supporting this fight is that all he is doing is settling scores and it has nothing to do with the law. It has nothing to do with decisions that have been made that he disagrees with. It's not about Roe v. Wade like you talk about. It's not about the proper role of a living constitution or originalism or any of those actual legal discussions that are important for judicial nominees and judicial philosophies or the practice of law. It is saying, if you wronged me when I didn't have power, now that I have power, I am trying to eliminate you as retribution. And that should be fundamentally opposed no matter who's doing it upon whom.
I think the most important lesson all Americans could take from the Trump era is you have to remember that what goes around comes around. And that is not me justifying with Donald Trump. If you are a Trump supporter and you kind of made this point earlier, Dane, if you're a Trump supporter and you like what he's doing to these law firms, you need to remember that a future president, Michelle Obama, I know Michelle Obama said she's not running for president, but whoever could be a Democratic president in the future could do the same thing. If you're okay with President Trump doing, we set this as precedent, and this is the way we're going to treat the legal system in the United States of America, then other presidents could do this. If you support the president of the United States being able to unlawfully deport people to a gulag in El Salvador, even though they have standing before a United States court, and even though the Trump administration admitted that they were wrongfully deported, but we're going to be okay with that, then a future Democratic president could do it too. And maybe would. Because unfortunately, abuse of government power is not a partisan thing, but everybody's hands are dirty on that. So I think we need to remember, and you can say the same thing about, for a long time, liberals really relied on the courts to sort of impose some of their policy agenda. And I think what we're finding now that the balance of power in the courts has shifted, we're finding out that maybe wasn't such a good strategy. And it maybe would have been better to pursue legislative solutions to some of this stuff. But, here we are. And, this is the great lesson, is the pendulum in politics swings. And the reason why we restrain the power of these offices is so that no matter who is wielding that power, they're in a box of our design. And when we let them out of the box, it's a dangerous thing.
And this is one of the ways of trying to get outside of that box. I agree. It's easy to summarize what you just said in my own words, but I fundamentally agree that it is dangerous. And the rule of law and due process is about this idea, which is no matter who is in power, we still have the same rules, because the moment they are gone, then it just becomes a version of might is right.
Well, it's ruled by man then,
Yeah.
not ruled by law, and we may as well be a monarchy then. I mean, the reason, going back to the Code of Hammurabi, we write down the laws so that everybody can know what the laws are, and then everybody's obliged to follow the laws, even the people who write the laws. And we're getting away from that if the law is just whatever the person in the White House decides it is in any given moment. That's a terrible way. Anything else, Dane?
No, I appreciate you having me on. It's always nice to talk to both of you. And, I do want to give Katie a shout out. She does not as much criminal defense, but I hear very, very good things from all of the judges and other lawyers in Bismarck. So I wanted to say that. And she's been very helpful in various things for me too. So thanks for having me on, and nice talking to you, Katie.
Thanks, Dane. And thanks for standing up to this. I know it's, not always easy to sign your name to something. So good to see you sign on to that amicus brief.
Yeah, particularly in this part of the world. I know a thing or two about not liking Donald Trump in the middle of North Dakota politics, and it's an uncomfortable position to be in. And I also get crap from my Republican prosecutor friends all the time for liking defense attorneys too much. In fact, our attorney general always, every time he calls me, he goes, "Yeah, you're just listening to your friends in the defense bar." I said, "Yeah, I am. I'm a I feel like that's the conservative position. They're fighting the government. I like that." Let's keep them in a box. But that's me. Jane, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
During our break, Matt just told me I need to push the live show because that's Matt's job, is to remind me to promote my own work. We do have another live show coming up at Peacock Alley. It's going to be a lot of fun. All the details, it's going to be coming up on Wednesday. As a matter of fact, the next time you hear me is going to be from the live show. Governor Armstrong's going to be there. Chuck Suki's going to be there. Katie, do you know Chuck Suki? You a Chuck Suki fan?
I know the name. I think I don't know him well, though. No, I'm sorry. I feel like I should.
You are missing out. He's got wonderful ballads. He's got foot stomping music. I love it. I love that kind of music anyway. Maybe it's not your cup of tea. I like it. Everybody should check it out. But Chuck Suki's going to be on the show, which I'm super excited about. That's April 23rd. Starts at 5:30 p.m. Our friends at the Peacock Alley are hosting again. That's going to be a lot of fun. Good interview with Dane DeKrey. And a lot of this stuff, again, people are going to view this through the partisan lens and say, oh, it's just a bunch of you Trump haters who don't like this. But I don't care who the president of the United States is. You shouldn't do this stuff. I don't want presidents to have enemies lists. I don't want presidents using their executive power to exact retribution on the organizations or the people they don't like. And I think it also gets back to this idea that the president of the United States, we had a debate about this on Facebook where I was writing about Representative Lori Van Winkle, taking her and the question of town halls, right? She kind of got in the headlines about vacations, but then she was emailing constituents saying, I'm not going to show up for town halls. And then that kind of bled over into the debate about our congressional delegation holding town halls. And, somebody said, well, they don't represent the whiny minority that just wants to show up to these town halls and shout at them. They represent the majority. And my response to that was, no. Once you're elected to office, you represent everybody.
Everyone.
You represent your entire constituency, including the people who disagree with you. And if you lose sight of that, then you don't belong in public office anymore. And
absolutely. Yeah. And I think I liked Dane's point too about it doesn't matter who the president is. I would sign on to a Jones Day brief or I would sign on to this brief, right? Like no one should be doing this. And then when we think about too, if roles were reversed in Congress, if we have Democratic congressional delegation for North Dakota and the Republicans want town halls, they should get town halls. Our elected officials represent all of us. And so they answer, we are their bosses, no matter if they like our whiny questions or not. Yeah. And so, we need to remove, I think, some of this whole partisan showmanship, all of these things out and just say, hey, you're here to do your job and it's for all the people.
And the showman stuff, that goes for the public too. Like the people who are showing up at these town halls are just shouting everybody down or just being disruptive or waving signs or even in some instances being violent. That's inappropriate too. And all you're doing is you're making it harder for us to have town halls.
Yep.
When I hear somebody like Julie Fedorchak said they're a little afraid about the security at some of these things, that's not unreasonable.
No,
unfortunately,
that's valid.
I wish it was, but that's a valid concern. Not that long ago, there was a gentleman who put his hands on Senator Kevin Cramer at a town hall. This was, I guess, not that long ago, 7 years ago. But it's still, it's happened. And it's a scary thing, and I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I'd just like to see good conversations where they sit and we have a calm discussion and people ask questions, tough questions, and they get, good answers. That's all. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
Yeah, it doesn't. And, I've heard from people too who are more on the left, who are fired up. They're mad about things. And so sometimes the mentality is, I want to go in and I want to make these people so uncomfortable because they haven't done what I've wanted. Well, that's not going to get anywhere. If you're going to make our elected officials or the leaders or whoever's in charge feel uncomfortable or feel threatened, that's not productive at all. And so I think no matter what side you're on, you need to come in with understanding that this can be a productive conversation if both sides are willing to be productive. And that takes both.
Well, once upon a time in my career, I organized Tea Party rallies and then also town halls when Congressman Pomeroy and Senator Byron Dorgan and Senator Ken Conrad, that 2009 interim, I was, because, their public meetings weren't well publicized. And I put in the effort. I created a map of everywhere that they were going to be. and encouraged people to attend these public meetings. But one of the great struggles in that was telling people you have to stay under control. You have to be respectful. If you go in there and you create a scene, it is completely counterproductive. You are just undermining your credibility. And that was a real struggle. That was I felt like I was a broken record telling people over and over again, don't make a scene. Don't make anybody scared. Don't shout. Don't shove if you want to have some signs, fine, but be respectful. And not everybody listened, unfortunately, but that's a hard thing, because when you open it up to the public, nobody controls who's going to show up. If
Yeah. And oftentimes the people who want to scream and shout and fight are the ones who show up. So it's hard
they
because
get the headline, and they get all the attention, and the person who just had a good question about, Medicaid or something gets overshadowed. And that's a shame.
it is. Yeah.
We got some listener feedback. Now, Chad and I referenced this a little bit earlier in the show. Chad and I were talking about the term hog house. If you watch the legislative proceedings in Bismarck long enough, you will hear somebody talk about hog housing a bill.
Yeah.
And if they hog house a bill, what it means is that they've replaced all of the text through amendment, they replaced all the text for the bill and basically turned it into a new bill. And Chad and I we were talking about a bill getting hog housed. I think it was one of the property tax bills. And we were like, where did that come from? And Chad and I didn't know. We got a couple of texts from people. One was from Senator Kristen Roars, who's a Republican from Fargo. She said it's from a bill in South Dakota in the 1920s, where the original bill was about building a hog barn, a hog house, at South Dakota State University. The legislature amended it to increase legislator pay. And so that's where it comes from, is hog housing, I guess. And we had Danny from Bismarck, who said, Rob and Chad, I first heard of the hog housing in the South Dakota legislature, which has an interesting and somewhat apocryphal origin story. Perhaps this is an example of an idea meandering northward. I think that's absolutely it. That's got to be where it came from, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And it's funny. I was an intern in the 2021 legislative session. That's where I first heard this term hog housing, because I think we did hog house a bill in one of my committees. And I didn't know what it meant, but it just felt like it made sense. Like that term just makes sense for what you're doing.
Somebody was telling me, I think it was another reporter when they first started covering the legislature in Bismarck, and they said, I just assumed it was a legislative term heard everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And then they talked to like colleagues from other states, and they're like, hog house? What in the world are you talking about? So this is very much this is a very niche audience. This is a very upper Midwestern legislative nerd term.
Yeah.
Hog housing a bill, but that's where it comes from. So that's good to know.
Yeah, interesting.
And then we also got a voicemail from Tony from Grand Forks, who had a question about Governor Armstrong and House Bill 1297 and ranked choice voting. So let's play that now.
Hey, Rob and Chad. I saw on the Inform today that Governor Armstrong signed into law House Bill 1297, which bans ranked choice voting and approval voting in North Dakota for all elections, local, state, and federal. All I hear in the legislature is local control, local control, local control. The Fargo Mayoral and City Commission had been running approval voting since 2020 successfully. So I don't understand why the state feels that they can tell the people of Fargo how they can run their elections, or can't run their elections. I mean, who even wanted this? Anyways, I appreciate you guys' time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this House Bill 1297. I really love the show. Thank you.
Hey, thoughts on that 1297?
I go back and forth on this, honestly. I see the point of having a uniform election law for the entire state and having everything run the same exact way. But I get the local control point too. And if Fargo wants, Fargo here being the only city in North Dakota who does this type of voting, ranked choice or approval, if they want to do that and their voters have approved of that, then why can't they? So I don't know. I'm kind of torn. But I don't know if it's working in Fargo, why we're trying to change it.
Yeah. I like the bill. Tony brought up the local control argument. And I think people who listen to the show know how I feel about local control arguments, because I think local control is not an ideology. It's not an argument in and of itself. Sometimes it makes sense for us to delegate certain authorities or certain policymaking authority to local governments, and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
I like the idea that we have a national military. I don't think it would be good to go back to the original way we did it, where every state just had its own militia. I like a national standing military. So I don't think, in that instance, I don't think I want local control over military. So this, to me, I think the interest in North Dakota having a unified election system where elections are held the same way in every corner of the state is beneficial to the state. I don't buy the idea that approval voting was like this super popular thing in Fargo to begin with. They voted for it. They also voted for it in a very low turnout election that was not held during a general election. I'd be interested in seeing if they can't vote on it again now, but I'd be interested in seeing what the results would be if it hadn't. I feel like it kind of snuck in the back door a little bit. That's just my feeling.
Well, yeah, and I don't know all the circumstances with Fargo, but I do get that Fargo, being the biggest city, has a lot of candidates for these elections, and so it makes sense. Obviously, approval voting or ranked choice isn't going to make sense in small communities.
Yeah.
But cities like Fargo, I get why they'd want to do it, and I get the benefits to it. So yeah,
I like, but to me also, one thing that we grapple with all the time is voters being confused on how to vote. I mean, you look at the debates over like voter ID, and it's interesting to me that some of the same people who tell us that requiring an ID at the poll is too confusing, and voters, we can't do that, we're going to suppress the vote, and that's terrible. But we can also use a completely separate set of rules and procedure for mayoral and city commission votes, and then a different one for legislative votes. No, do it all one way. And if you really like ranked choice and approval voting, then change the state law. Start a ballot initiative or a constitutional amendment or lobby the legislature. But I like the idea of when we hold elections in North Dakota, no matter what we're electing or where we're holding them, it's the same process. It's easy. And if you want to change that, then let's change it. But I think in this instance, uniformity, I'm sympathetic to a point to the local control argument, but I think the benefits of uniformity outweigh it in my mind.
yeah.
Anything else? When do you predict this legislative session is going to get over?
I don't know. You mentioned your live show is April 23rd. That is also the Sine Die party, although early. So yeah, I guess April 30th, I think, is a good guess, but it's
they
fun.
can hold a Sine Die party after Sine Die. Nobody be in Bismarck anymore.
Right. You have to have it,
Everybody's sick of Bismarck by that point.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's sick of Bismarck right now, honestly, but I walked around the Capitol yesterday, and with everything going on, you can just feel the tension. Everyone's kind of moving around. There's a lot of people going back and forth between offices, between groups, and everyone's kind of stressed. And it's the spirits are not high right now. So you can tell it's the end of session.
When it's even hard, like I'm trying to write about the things that are happening, but things start happening so quickly. I'm concerned about, should I write about this? Because by the time I get it published, this might not even be relevant anymore. The bill could have changed, or somebody brings a wild amendment, walks in the door, and who knows? So it's a very fluid, very frustrating part of the session, and it's not everybody's fault. Like, I'm not pointing fingers. It's just the process, right? I mean, we don't really have a choice. This is the way it is, and it's hard. But any predictions on any of the final bills coming out?
Not really. I've been trying to pay attention to tax and the school choice bills, but like we just talked about, there's so many moving parts right now that I'm kind of just waiting to see what actually happens with those. And so, I don't have any final predictions on the big bills. I'm just watching to see what happens.
I think that if they do a school choice bill that is only for private schools, I think that sucker is going to get referred to the ballot, and it's probably going to lose, because that is such I actually went and looked up the statistics. It's a little over 13,000 students who are enrolled in private schools in North Dakota. Public schools are 138,000. So we're going to pass a $20+ million subsidy for the small percentage of kids who go to private school.
Right.
Granted, I realize it's maybe more people would be able to choose private school if they have that money available, but I don't think it's going to be a large number. And so many North Dakotans live in rural parts of the state where private schools just never going to be an option. Nobody's going to build a private school in Crosby. It's just not going to happen. So, if you live in Crosby, like, this does nothing for me. Like, I'm spending a lot of money to subsidize something that I don't have access to. I think if they do it, it's got to be something like the education savings account, which benefits public school, homeschool, private school, just benefit everybody. And I really like the ESA concept. I mean, I'm in love with it because, I think of like the camps that maybe I could have sent my kids to that would have been in the budget, music camps, whatever. I will say the one thing is I hope they don't make any of those funds available for sports. And maybe this is terrible of me to say, but I really want it focused on academic pursuit.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. There's plenty of funding for athletics, it seems, and so
I want people to use it for tutoring. I want them to use it for an engineering course online or something that the kids are really going to get something out of it. And I like that it's going to make our education system more flexible if we do it. I think it's great. I hope that's the version they push through, and I have some degree of confidence that it will be, but I really hope so.
Yeah, I think that benefits the most people. It was interesting. The discussion on the Senate floor recently was over, the private school funding only benefiting the major cities that have those private schools and how it doesn't benefit these rural communities. But then kind of the discussion on, well, we vote on bills all the time that maybe don't benefit my constituents, but I still vote for them. And so I just thought that discussion was interesting. I'm not saying I support that bill at all, but it was an interesting perspective of, you have City of Bismarck representatives voting on agriculture bills where their constituents aren't necessarily benefiting from, but they still approve them. So I don't know. That was kind of, it wasn't something I thought of.
It's a fair argument, but in this instance, we're talking about a specific service, which just does not exist. I mean, agriculture, you could say,
benefits the state.
The fact that farmers are creating crops and employing people and generating tax revenue benefits the whole state. The oil industry benefits the whole state. The coal industry benefits the whole state. This is something. We're subsidizing a very specific service. And I think that's the way to do it. All right. Well, we're going to put a pin in it there. Katie, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on and doing this and having a conversation, and we'll definitely try to get you on again. Once again, we got a live show coming up April 23rd, 5:30 p.m., downtown Bismarck, Peacock Alley. Our friends at Peacock Alley hosting us again. For some reason, they saw what we did last time, and they decided we want more of that. I don't know. I question their judgment, but we're going to do it again, April 23rd, 5:30 p.m., downtown Bismarck. Also, remember, if you heard us read some of the texts and voicemails from earlier, you can send us texts. You can leave us voicemails, 701-587-3141. Save it in your phone. It's Plain Talk. Fire away as you listen. We'd love to hear your feedback. Also, follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X. Our handle is Plain Talk ND. If you search for that on all those platforms, you'll find it. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host, Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
It's just how you make sausage, and sometimes they put flavors in there you don't like.